bringing fresh meaning. BFM 89.9.
It's 6:39. You're listening to Inside Story with Sharmilla and Lynn, and we're marking World Population Day, which was yesterday. Well, first we looked at trends and numbers. After this, we're going to be taking a look at policies and measures that need to be in place. But we'd like to hear from you. Do you want a small or large family or no children at all? You can call 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. Before we get to our next guest, I think we have time for some messages.
Yes, so we've been asking whether, or rather how much also of that decision, whether or not to have children, how many children, is driven by stuff outside of family planning, right? Down to how you live, what you can afford. And Munif, for example, is saying, I live in Shah Alam, I work in Puchong, yet I take 2 hours to drive to work daily because of jams. I don't want to shoot myself in the foot and make it 3 or 4 hours in the future, so I'm probably going to have a small family. The 3 to 4 hour jam is no exaggeration, by the way. That's just called a Tuesday in Jakarta. And that's a fair point. I mean, I think the extension from 2 hours to 3 to 4 is important, especially if you think about the age gap when it comes to your children. So how many schools, how many school drop-offs are you going to have to be doing? How many different after-school classes are you going to have to consider? There are a lot of things that are factored in, I think, to your daily schedule and how it will be impacted through having or through choosing to have children.
Yeah, so quality of life, right, is a big choice that you have to decide on if you decide to have children. Benjamin says, it isn't just an issue of fertility, but it's also the consequences after having children. So things like affordability to have kids, the affordability to care for aging parents, rising inflation, stagnating salaries leading to both parents working with no time to build a family, compounded by the need to care for aging parents.
Yeah, that's a depressing list.
That is a sandwich generation list right there.
It is. And it also, I think, speaks to policies that actually live beyond population policies. Because I think when we think about that, or at least for me personally, when we talk about policies as they pertain to population boosting or control, the things that come to mind are, for example, Singapore offering incentives, South Korea doing the same, offering incentives for people or for couples to have more children at a younger age, in fact. And yet, those countries have it different to us. But for us, if we're talking about it, it goes above and beyond, right? It needs to be policies or structures that address the issue of how much it costs to have kids, whether or not there are ways for me to ensure that my aging parents, have access to good and affordable healthcare. All these things affect population growth in ways that I'm not sure we're taking into account at the moment.
Just to close off, for now at least, we have Nadia, who called earlier with this cryptic remark. They just said, I want kids, but not so many. Maybe 3 to 4 max.
Fair enough. I mean, that was
I think it's entirely subjective what not too many would where that line would lie.
Exactly. And we did ask small or large. So I guess this is a medium. To me, it is large, actually. But I grew up in a smaller family.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I come from a family of 3 siblings, and I don't think we're a huge family. So actually, yeah, now that I think about it, 3 to 4 sounds like a medium size to me. Keep those thoughts coming. Do you want a large or small family or no children at all? How much of this is driven by these discussions on population, resources, and so on? You can call 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio. Joining us now is Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Center for Market Education. Carmelo, always a pleasure to have you with us.
Good evening, my pleasure.
So the UN has predicted that the world will reach a population rate of 8 billion by this November. Could you help us understand the significance of this number and the impact of it, especially as we're increasingly sensitive to issues like climate change and food security?
Well, I would like to spend a word of optimism on this, in all these gloomy discussions, I would say neo-Malthusian discussions that we have on population. Because if we look at the numbers, the world population at the beginning of the 60s, the 1960s, was just 3 billion, okay? The big jump began after World War II. Okay, if we look at these 3 billion in the 1960s, which is just a couple of generations ago, more than half of these people around the world were living in absolute poverty. Okay, Now, after 2 generations, just 2 generations, we have more than double the world population, almost 8 billion, and the people living in absolute poverty are 700 million. So it means less than 10%, and half than the people that were living in absolute poverty in the 1960s. So this tells us that we have been doing remarkably well in being able to create more resources and to distribute these resources in a way that more people are enjoying the fruits of that resources. Dad McCloskey calculated that since the onset of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, up to now, the average person on planet grew the income by 900%. This never happened in the history of mankind before. So if we want to look at the future challenges, so like climate change or food security, so far the only real challenge that for the first time when the number of people living in extreme poverty started to go up again was in 2020 because of lockdown. Lockdown has been extremely harmful for the poor. So that has been the big challenge, but I think it's something that can be quickly reverted. Looking at the future challenges, we should look at the reasons of success of the past. So being innovative, so being able to create new technologies to create more food for more people. So for feeding a hungry world, as certain companies say. And so to unleash the human creativity so that challenges can be met thanks to technology that arises from the creativity that is embedded in humankind.
I know this is going to be a general question, but we are seeing population changes in different parts of the world, right? We said earlier that, for example, population booms are going to be concentrated likely in 8 countries, actually, up until 2050. So considering we also have aging populations here, booming populations there, what kind of population concerns are we seeing in different countries around the world?
Yeah, indeed, I think you summarized. Basically, there are countries that are facing more a winter of population, so that have to find a way to sustain an aging population, and countries that instead are really booming in terms of younger peoples. And I would add, for the case of aging populations, the problem of low nativity, of low newborns, because this is a complex issue. Probably we will touch this a bit later when we will talk about families. But if we look historically, people start to have less children, not when they are poorer, but when they are richer. So there is an inverse relationship between income and size of the family. So it seems somehow that as we become richer, we become a little bit more selfish, maybe, if you allow me the expression. So we don't want to have babies around. We want to have more time for other hobbies. This is probably due also to the fact that a growth in income brings also less attachment to traditional values, like religious values. And if you break your link with the metaphysical part of life, then you wonder what's the reason to put in the word new babies. So why you create this link with the future if you somehow don't believe in a future anymore? So there is a metaphysical aspect, I think, that need to be associated to the phenomenon that cannot be disregarded as well.
We'll continue our conversation after this. We're speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Center for Market Education, on policies revolving around the question of population. We'd like to hear from you. Do you want a small or large family, or no children at all? You can call us, WhatsApp us, tweet us, and keep it here on Inside Story, BFM 89.9.
Beyond Frivolous Matters, BFM 89.9, the business station.
It's 6:49. You're listening to Inside Story with Sharmilla and Lynn, and today we're marking World Population Day, and we're continuing our conversation on policies around the issue of population / overpopulation, as the concern generally is. And we're speaking with Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Center for Market Education. Carmelo, just to pick up where we left off, what are some complications that could arise when we go down the path of implementing population control measures?
Allow me to say that the expression population control measures is quite terrifying to me, in the sense that it looks very scientific, but if we go down to the meaning, it means that some politicians, and you can replace the word politician with whatever name you like or you don't like, in Malaysia or around the world, or some bureaucrat from the United Nations is putting his or her idea on how many children I should have. So I think that is an interference on the sphere of private life of individuals that should not be the concern of any government or any agency around the world at all. The concern of policy should be, given a certain population with certain issues, like we have not enough young people or we have an aging population, how we address these issues, but not how many children we really should have or not. We have seen that China has done that and has been a total disaster in terms of policy, but also in terms of the cultural and consequences that you have on it. You break something in the population.
So China was something that I was thinking about a lot as well, because like you said, it's one way to see things play out writ large, right? And we've seen things like the sex imbalance within the country's population, now a rapidly aging population as a result of the one-child policy. You've already spoken about your distaste in some ways for having policies like this in place, but when thinking about it, when planning for it, how can these sorts of long-term outcomes be accounted for, or is it simply impossible?
I think is impossible if you consider what policy should be. I mean, policy implies recognizing what you as a human being can actually plan for the others and what you cannot. So being a good policymaker implies a huge dose of humility. So thinking that you can really plan the growth of the population without creating negative consequences for human beings is simply absurd. And even if we look at the mere economic consequences, so without touching the moral aspect, indeed, and we see this in the opposite case, so in a country which is not a communist country like Japan, but has been experiencing a winter of the population for a long time. If the population doesn't grow, there is no reason for the economy to grow. And there is no reason for saving to be accumulated. And if there are no savings, then there are no investments. So even if we don't want to touch the moral aspect, even from the pure economic standpoint, is not really a winning strategy.
On the flip side of this, we are also seeing a lot of countries with low birth rates trying to incentivize having children, including with things like tax breaks or even a controversial suggestion from the UK recently to tax childless people more. What's your take on all this?
I would rather play on the positive side, so try to incentivize people, so family, giving incentives and fiscal deductions to family with more children, rather than on the negative side, punishing people that for whatever reason we must respect the choice of not having children. So fiscal incentives for numerous families, I think, makes a lot of sense and are the way to go, together also with a more holistic approach to the problem. At the beginning, you have mentioned, in example, the issue of transportation, mobility, flexibility at work, which is also important. And I would add also some further cultural element. I don't want necessarily to speak against technology, but let's think of what technology has done in our life at this perspective. We are always working. We go back home, we have access to the emails, to WhatsApp, through our phones and everything. So we never really have that break in which we say, or we are losing the ability to create that break in which we say, this is family time. So I don't look at my phone. Whoever is looking for me, I don't answer. So this is somehow compromising also our ability to build a healthy family environment. So a family in which it is not necessarily stressful to have more children, because then if you have to run after children and after your thousands of WhatsApp messages from your boss, your colleagues, and etc., then it becomes more complicated. So I think we should also try to re-educate ourselves to a healthy relationship with the means that we have at our disposal.
This was something that we spoke about a little bit earlier, actually, this idea of social structures and how they factor in. So what should a country have in place to create this sort of supportive structure for larger families?
I think where there is the fiscal side that you have mentioned, connectivity is another aspect, and I think also try to build cities in a way in which sociality is incentivized. So in which, in example, to go to a park, to a place of encounter is not too difficult, because that is where you meet people and you build enlarged family in the sense of community. And I think that community development is the biggest support for building families, because then somehow other parents are used to take care also of your children, and vice versa. At least this was quite normal when I was growing up in my neighborhood back in Italy, and probably we are losing that. So, but this is not simply cultural; it's also the way in which our cities are built, the prevalence of shopping malls over different kind of social environments. So I think that also an adequate urban planning for incentivizing social re-encounter and rediscovery of community is something to be wished for.
Carmelo, what initiatives are you hoping to see the government make in preparing for our predicted population trends?
I think Malaysia is unfortunately going on a trend of aging population. So sooner or later, Malaysia will have to tackle the issue of pension funds. So a reform of pension age, a reform of how pensions are paid and collected, the funds are collected, and etc. So this will be probably the most immediate need for Malaysia. At the same time, we need to think about a social environment, a work environment in which people are allowed to take care of aging parents. Also the concentration of population in the urban environment is breaking the chain of natural support that instead you have in the kampung. And these are, I think, urgent measures that need to be accompanied also by a rediscovery of the importance of fertility and natality for giving new babies for the children. And in this sense, I think it's important if the government shows to be committed to build a better future, because if we see that someone there believes in the future, then people may become also less pessimistic about the future.
Carmelo, thanks for speaking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
That was Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, CEO of the Center for Market Education, weighing in on the types of policy measures, support structures we need to have in place, taking into account our population trends, and in a larger sense, the ideal that we might want to strive for, really. We would like to hear from you. Do you want a small or large family, or no children at all? How much do these conversations about population and resources weigh on those decisions? You can call 77332900, WhatsApp 018-789-8899, tweet us at BFM Radio.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more great interviews, go to bfm.my or find us on iTunes. BFM 89.9, the business station.